right, everybody. Well, welcome back to Health Made Easy. I'm your host, Dr. Jason Jones. Super excited for our guest today. We have Dr. Glenn Livingston. And what we are going to be talking about today is something that is never been more relevant than it is right now, and that is how to stop overeating. And what we're going to do is, you may be very familiar with Dr. Glenn. You may be very familiar with his book, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, and tell you how to get a copy of it. But you also may not know who he is. So what I'm going to do is have Dr. Glenn, you just sort of introduce yourself, kind of your journey to where you've gotten to right now, and your backstory.
Sure. You can just call me Glenn. Is perfectly fine.
Happy to.
So the thing that you all need to know is that I'm not just a psychologist who decided to work with overeaters. I had a very significant problem myself. At one point, I was probably close to 300. I hover in the like 210 to 220 range these days. And I had all sorts of autoimmune problems and, joint problems and things like that. And most of those have resolved as I've, lost the weight about 10 years ago now and taking care of myself. So I was an active kid. I'm 6'4", I'm modestly muscular, and I figured out that if I could work out 2-3 hours a day, that I could eat whatever I wanted to. So, whole pizzas, boxes of muffins, half a dozen chocolate bars. It really didn't matter if it wasn't nailed down, I could do it. And I wasn't gaining weight. I was really happy. I was a big, exercising, eating, and sleeping machine. And I thought it was like a superpower. I didn't think it was a problem. But when I got to be 22, 23 years old and I was married and I was commuting 2 hours each way to go to graduate school and I was seeing patients, I barely had time to work out a half an hour a day, much less 2 hours a day, right? Or half an hour a couple times a week, much less 2 hours a day. Yeah. And I found that the food still had a hold of me though. I was thinking about it all the time. I would be sitting with a suicidal patient or people just after a divorce in a high risk situation. And I'd be thinking, well, when can I get the next pizza? Or, when can I go to the deli and dislodge my jaw and empty the tray into it? Mm. And that bothered me more than the weight did at the time because I carried the weight well when I was heavy and people weren't really complaining or saying I was fat or anything until it got to be really heavy. And to me, being a great psychologist was always first and foremost my goal in life. I wanted to be able to lend people my soul because that's what you got to do to really have an impact on someone. It's not just an intellectual thing. It's not like solving jigsaw puzzles. It's more like getting people to love and trust you enough that they're comfortable thinking new thoughts and trying new things. Wow. Coming from the family I came from with 17 therapists, I thought the problem must be psychological in nature. I figured I must have a hole in my heart, and if I could solve that hole in my heart and fill up that hole in my heart, then I wouldn't have to keep filling up the hole in my stomach. And so I went to all the best psychologists and psychiatrists, and I took medication, and I went to Overeaters Anonymous, and I went on a kind of spiritual journey, and I learned a lot, and it shaped me as a person in a lot of profound and good ways, but it really didn't help me with my overeating. I would get a little thinner, a lot fatter, a little thinner, a lot fatter. So there was something wrong with that paradigm. And there were 3 things that happened that got me to shift the paradigm from a love yourself thin paradigm to a tough love, be the alpha wolf of your own mind kind of paradigm. If you think about an alpha wolf, when it's challenged for leadership, it doesn't go, oh my goodness, someone needs a hug, right? No. It growls and it snarls and it says, get back in the line. It asserts its superiority. And I eventually came to the conclusion that that was a better solution than what I was doing. And I'll tell you why and the elements of that solution. But there are 3 things that led me to that conclusion. The first one was because my ex-wife traveled for business, I worked at home and I didn't have any kids. I had an awful lot of time on my hands. And I started a second career as a consultant for big industry, mostly big food, big pharma. And I wish I didn't do it. I feel like I was on the wrong side of the war. Kind of feel like the Marlboro man at the end of his life.
Yeah.
But what I saw there was the big food industry in particular engineering all of these hyper palatable food-like substances, like these concentrations of starch and sugar and fat and excitotoxins, and it was all designed to hit the bliss point in the reptilian brain without giving you the nutrition to feel satisfied. And that had nothing to do, I mean, the result of that is addiction, and it has nothing to do with the fact that my mama didn't love me enough, or was in a bad marriage, or I had this psychological problem, or I was a little depressed or lonely. It was, fat cats in white suits with mustaches laughing all the way to the bank while we look for love at the bottom of a bag or a box or a container,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And the things that I saw that went on there were they're scary. They're scary. I remember this advertising exec who became a good friend of mine at a major food bar manufacturer saying that their primary insight, their primary profitable insight was taking the vitamins out of the bar because they were too expensive and they made it taste worse. And they put the money into the packaging instead, and they engineered these very vibrant packages, vibrant, diverse, multicolored packages, which if you think about it in nature is set up to signal to our evolutionary brain that there's a diversity of micronutrients available. There's a reason they tell you to eat the rainbow. And you want a salad with deep green lettuce and blueberries and yellow carrots and red tomatoes. You're getting a diversity of micronutrients when you do that.
Yeah.
Our brains are set up to look at that. But in this case, it was kind of a parasitic relationship. They were taking advantage of that button in the evolutionary brain, but they weren't giving us the nutrition that they were signaling. And I don't mean to single out this food bar manufacturer, because this goes on all across the industry in all sorts of different ways. And the point was that this wasn't a psychological force. This was just a very real, multi-billion-dollar force outside of myself that I and everybody else was contending with in society. Then I thought about the advertising industry, and they know what they're doing. I was an advertising consultant. That was my corporate consulting. And they know what they're doing. People think advertising doesn't work on them, but advertising works better on you when you think it doesn't work on you,
right?
Because your defenses are down. And so they've got you where they want you. And then the addiction treatment industry was saying, you can't quit this stuff even if you want to. You've got a disease, there's something wrong with you, and the best you could possibly do is abstain one day at a time. These are irresistible human impulses. And so it just sounds like this perfect storm for creating overeating across the society. I think it's a big part of why we have such an epidemic going on.
Oh, yeah.
So just kind of fast forward to like 1997, 1998. I decided to do this study for myself. I wanted to figure out, this is my last vestige of trying to find a psychological answer, a depth psychology answer. And I wanted to figure out what was behind the quest for certain foods. Were people who struggled with chocolate different than people who struggled with pizza or pretzels or things like that? And so I intercepted people in the days when clicks were cheap. I set up this big study online, and I would ask them what they were stressed about, and then I would ask them what foods they had trouble resisting when they started eating them. And lo and behold, I found some interesting things. I found that people who started their binges with chocolate, like me, they tended to be lonely or brokenhearted. And the people who would start their binges with pretzels or chips or salty, crunchy things, they tended to be stressed at work. And people who started their binges with soft, chewy things like pizza and pasta and bagels, they tended to be stressed at home. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. That's really kind of interesting. And before I was going to talk to anybody publicly about it, I called my mom, because my mom was also a psychotherapist and also struggled with chocolate. And I said, Mom, I found this really interesting thing. And, I'm feeling a little lonely and brokenhearted. I'm not really happy in the marriage and some things, but why am I like this? Why do I go running to chocolate whenever I feel lonely or depressed or brokenhearted? And she gets this horrible look on her face, and she says, I'm so sorry, honey. And I said, Mom, it's okay. It's 40 years ago. I don't care what happened. I forgive you. I love you. I just want to figure this out. She said, well, in 1965, when you were 1 year old, they were talking about sending your father to Vietnam. He was a captain in the army, and they were talking about sending him there. And we were trying to get pregnant with your sister, and I was terrified I'm going to be a young army widow with 2 kids, and what am I going to do? At the same time, my father, your grandfather, had just gotten out of prison. And I had no idea he was guilty. I had no idea he was doing these things. And he was, and my whole world came apart. So I was depressed and anxious most of the time. When you would come running to me, wanting some love or to play or even some healthy food, I didn't have the wherewithal to do that all the time. So I kept a big bottle of chocolate Bosco syrup in a refrigerator on the floor. And I said, Glenn, go get your Bosco. Go get your Bosco. And you go running over to the Bosco and you take it out of the refrigerator, you'd open the cap and you'd suck on it and you'd go into a chocolate sugar coma, and I could resume staring at the wall. And if this were a movie, it would have been one of those movie moments. We'd have a big hug and a big cry, and we'd forgive each other, and I would never have trouble with chocolate again, right? If that's the way things really worked,
Yeah.
if it really was that emotional hole in my, but Jason, what actually happened was I had more trouble with chocolate after that. The reason I had more trouble with chocolate was because I discovered this little voice in my head, and it went something like this. Hey, Glenn, you know what? You're right. Our mama didn't love us enough, and she left a great big chocolate-sized hole in your heart. And until you can find the love of your life and get out of this marriage, you're going to have to go right on binging on chocolate. Yippee, let's get some right now. So it was this voice of justification. So I kind of put these things together. I read a little bit of neurology, and I started to understand that it really is the reptilian brain that's firing when we feel like we can't control ourselves with food. It's like a false firing of the emergency response system. That's why we say things like hand over the chocolate and nobody gets hurt. But the reptilian brain, and it's funny, but people feel like that.
Right.
And this is why we could read a diet book on the weekend and have the best of intentions, and then by 3 o'clock, when you're in front of a chocolate bar at Starbucks, you totally change your mind. It's because the reptilian brain takes over. The thing about the reptilian brain is that it doesn't know love. The reptilian brain thinks, do I eat it? Do I mate with it? Or do I kill it? It's like let's use a visual example. Do I eat with it? Do I eat it? Do I mate with it? Or do I kill it? It's like a bad college drinking game.
Yeah.
It's not until you have the mammalian brain on top of that, and this doesn't matter if this is evolution or whether God put it there, but the point is that it is there. And the mammalian brain can inhibit the reptilian brain and say, before you eat, mate, or kill that thing, what impact is that going to have on your tribe and your loved ones? That's more important than eating, mating, or killing this thing right away.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, there's a neocortex that says, before you eat, mate, or kill that thing, what about your long-term plans? Like weight loss and fitness, but what about the kind of person you're trying to be in the world, your contribution to society. And so all these years, it seems to be that the reptilian brain was taking over. Was being targeted by these products of industry. We didn't have chocolate bars and pizza and pretzels and Pop-Tarts on the savannah, right?
No.
Right? So these are unnatural concentrations of pleasure that we're not really evolutionarily prepared for. And as a consequence, we experience them somewhat like a drug. They actually do overtake our minds, make it difficult to think straight. And they overtake the pleasure systems and kind of reorient what we think about and what we're looking for reinforcement with. And so I said, okay, this is a biological urge. It's a very primitive biological urge. And I'm having trouble controlling it, trying to love myself. Maybe I have to take control instead. And if you think about it, there are other very strong biological urges which we control every day and we're expected to in a civilized society. Like if there's an attractive woman downstairs on the street, I don't go running out to kiss her. I actually kind of hide in my closet because I'm not good with that. but you know what I mean? I'm expected to control these urges that are generated by my reproductive organs. If I had to pee really, really badly right now, I would say, well, excuse me, bladder, but I'm in the middle of this interview with Jason. Let me complete the interview and I'll pee later. Yeah. I take control. I don't ignore the need, but I express it in the appropriate way. So why is food any different? And the truth is, it's really not. It's really not. Now, in order to do that, I did something kind of embarrassing. And people will have heard my credentials. They know I'm kind of a sophisticated psychologist, and I work with all of these companies, and I was in all of these magazines and stuff. But what I did was not very sophisticated at all. And I was not going to teach this at this point. I decided that I needed a way to know when this thing was active inside me.
Okay.
But decided I'm going to call it my inner pig. I wish I called it something different. I wish I called it a food monster, but it was private, and who cares? I called it my inner pig. Then I would draw a really clear line in the sand. Like, I will never eat chocolate on a weekday again. I will only ever have it on Saturday and Sunday in just 2 ounces, right? And with that line in the sand, I figured that if I heard a little voice in my head that suggested I have chocolate on a Wednesday, because, you know, I'm standing online at Starbucks, and wouldn't it be nice to have the chocolate with the latte? And gee, Glenn, you worked out hard enough. You're not going to gain any weight from just a little bit of chocolate. No big deal. It'll be just as easy to start tomorrow. And besides, chocolate comes from a cocoa bean, and that grows in a plant, and therefore it's a vegetable. I would decide that that's not me. That's my inner pig squealing for pig slop. Chocolate is pig slop on a Wednesday. I only eat chocolate on the weekends. Chocolate is pig slop. I don't eat pig slop. I don't let farm animals tell me what to do. And as ridiculous as that sounds, after everything that I tried, after decades of struggling, it was not a miracle in the sense that I didn't wake up thin the next day or just totally able to control my eating, you know, instantaneously. But it was a miracle in the sense that I would wake up at the moment of impulse and get these extra few seconds to make the right decision if I wanted to. And it was a miracle in the sense that it cut away the confusion. I no longer thought it was this deep psychological issue. I no longer thought that I was diseased or out of control. I no longer thought there was some external force taking control of me. I realized this is just a primitive biological impulse, and I needed to wake up and make better choices. But then I made the choices easier. I came up with rules that I could actually follow right away, and I'd stopped worrying about losing weight for a little while. I said, the most important thing is that I take control. I need to figure out how to take control and regain my spirit, because the pig had me beaten down. The pig made me feel hopeless and despairing and powerless. And you know, anybody who's really overtaken by overeating feels like it's not like having a life. It's horrible. And so all I wanted to do, I didn't care if I was fat for, 6 months or a year. I just wanted to figure out what rules could I follow, what rules can't I follow.
Yep.
And over time, I adjusted the rules. I would keep a journal of all the things the pig would say. I thought maybe I was going crazy at the time. I said, Glenn, you're a psychologist. What are you doing? You're sitting and writing about what your pig is saying. But for example, if a pig says it'll be just as easy to start your silly diet tomorrow, that's not true. The truth is that if you're in a hole, you have to stop digging, because if you have a craving today and you reinforce that craving today, that craving will be stronger tomorrow. That's the way the brain works. It's the principle of neuroplasticity, right? And so the pig would say those types of things, and I would kind of disprove its cancerous logic. It would say, a little won't hurt. And then I'd go over the last 40 times that I said a little won't hurt and showed it what happened. It would say, well, you can be good now, but I'm going to get you eventually, so you might as well just give up and binge. And I would say, well, if I always eat healthy in the present moment, you can only ever use the present moment to be healthy, because that's the only moment you really have. And if I know that it's always going to be now, the future is an infinite string of nows, then I will always eat healthy. All I have to do is not have chocolate now, and then I win. And so I would come up with these logical refutations. I learned how to refute what the pig was saying. And then later on, I learned how to exit the emergency response system. We actually have two distinctions in our nervous system. There's a sympathetic nervous system, which is like our emergency response system.
Yep.
Gets us revved up for action. There's a hungry bear chasing us. We got to do something. We're starving. We got to, yeah. And or there's the parasympathetic nervous system that slows us down and lets us rest and digest and, take time to think about what we want to do and plan and strategize and everything like that.
Yeah.
So I learned to take a deep breath when I heard the pig say something. I learned that if I breathed in for shorter than I breathed out, that more effectively activates the parasympathetic system, because my friend Laurie Hammond calls these 7-Eleven breaths. If you were being chased by a hungry bear, you wouldn't have time to breathe out for longer than you were breathing in. You'd be going. So your breathing is a signal to your nervous system to calm down. So I can do that. And then I learned to write down what the pig was saying right away, because writing is an upper brain activity and binging is a lower brain activity. So I learned to do those things and then to kind of refute it in the moment. And slowly but surely, I reclaimed my power and I got thin and happy. And then, as I was getting divorced in 2015, I was a minor partner in a publishing company, given the business connections that I had. And my CEO said, we have to write a book ourselves because we need to attract better authors and we need to do some marketing experiments and show them we know what we're doing. And I said, well, I've got this journal I've kept for 8 years about me versus my inner pig. He says, you're crazy, Glenn, but I love it. Why don't you turn it into a book? So I turn it into a book. He calls me back 3 weeks later after I sent it to him. And he says, Glenn, donuts or pig slop? I don't eat pig slop. I don't live farm animals. Tell me what to do. And he got all psyched about it. He proceeds to lose 100 pounds, over a significant period of time. And so we published it, and the rest is, it kind of took off. And now we have 1 million readers and 13,000 reviews, and we don't eat pig slop, and we don't let farm animals tell us what to do.
Now, is that the name of the book?
No. No, the name of the book is Never Binge Again.
Never been. Okay, good. That's a good. I like that. Never binge again. So
yeah.
going back to the rules that you set up, because I'm thinking that these would be rules that people could implement in their own lives. They're probably, I would imagine, they're probably in the book. And one of the things I really enjoyed about what you said was you confronted, the beast, if you will, or the problem. You didn't try to water it down. You didn't try to, make it into something that it wasn't, so that you felt better about it. You just called it out for what it was, whatever you came up with your name, the little pig, and you just kind of went after it and stepped back and analyzed it. So I know the first one was that you took a deep breath. Now, is that rule 1, taking a deep breath, or are there the steps?
If you want to implement this, you need to start with one simple rule.
Okay.
You need to ask yourself, what rule could I make that wouldn't be too onerous, that I would do, but would be a clear signal to myself that I was taking control? So, for example, there's this trucker who he needed to lose 150 pounds, which he eventually did. But he had to eat at fast food restaurants 3 times a day because they had truck stops. And he says, well, I'm not going to stop eating at fast food restaurants, but I'll tell you what, I won't go back for seconds. And that gave him a sense of power and hope and enthusiasm. And he proceeded to do that. Other people say, I don't want to make any rules that are going to eliminate anything. I prefer to make rules that support mindfulness. So some people will say, I always put my fork down between bites, or I write down what my meal is about to be with specific quantities before I have the meal, or I take a picture of my food before I eat it, or I'll never eat in front of a screen again. Some people will say, I'll only have chocolate on the weekend. Some people will say I'll only have pretzels in Major League Baseball parks. But most people know there's one thing they could do that's fairly simple that will make a big difference, even if they don't lose weight at first. Once you make that rule, your inner food monster, maybe you want to call it food monster, not a pig, it's going to start making a lot of noise. It's going to start trying to talk you out of it. And that's a good thing. We want that to happen. That's your signal when you hear a squeal. A squeal is anything that suggests you should break your rule. To say, oh, okay, the only way to extinguish these cravings is to have these cravings and resist them. So this is a good thing. This is my opportunity. Why do you want me to eat this? Food monster. Why do you want me to do this? And give up on my goals and dreams. And then you listen to what it says, and you take a deep breath and you deactivate. It's better to take a deep breath before you ask that question, but you can take a deep breath after you ask that question also. And you write down all the things that it says. And then you take another 7-Eleven breath. And you ask yourself, why is it wrong? What's wrong with what it's saying? the last thing you can do, which is really helpful, is to ask yourself, why would sticking to your rule make you a better, happier person right now? And most people have taken the time before they've chosen a rule to say, well, I want to feel like I'm more in control. I want to feel proud of myself. I want to feel like I can accomplish things. Yes, I want to lose a little weight, but I want to be free of the digestive distress that I've been experiencing from eating X, Y, or Z in my simple rule.
Okay.
And so I'll be a better, happier person because I know I'm one step closer to, the body that I want and the mental clarity that I'm looking for, whatever it is. So you kind of link it to what you're striving for, because otherwise the rules become like these Nazi food police inside your head and you want to get away from them. But if they're actually helping you to build the kind of life that you want to build, then it's very different.
Yeah, and I like that strategy because it opens up, potential and opportunities. They're not just this sort of one cookie cutter way of doing it, like starting out and finding that one rule, that you can follow, because it reminds me of a story that I read once in a book where this guy he couldn't lose weight, no matter what he did, he could never lose it. And then he decided to do something somewhat similar, because as I was listening to your story, I was like, well, there's a little bit of negative reinforcement in there, to do what you did. And that's what he did. Is he was a Jewish man, and he decided that he was going to write a check, for $1,000 to some sort of like American neo-Nazi white supremacist, organization. He was going to give it to his friend, and he gave it to his friend. And then he said, hey, listen, if I have not lost this weight by this date, you mail that check in. And the guy was like, I'll do it for you, type of a deal. And so that gave him the motivation, to at least to achieve the one goal. And the weight that he never could lose, through negative reinforcement, he was able to do it. But I like this better because you actually get to analyze like the inner,
Jason, do you know I did that exact thing? Not with a friend, but with an attorney. I was so desperate. I called this attorney and I said, I want you to weigh me. And if I'm not 10 pounds less by New Year's, it was $10,000. I want you to send this $10,000 check to this, neo-Nazi organization. And
Okay.
I'm a Jewish guy also.
Oh my goodness.
That's really funny. That's really funny. But that just shows how desperate we felt. And this was before we knew any of this.
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah. But I love the way that you take your obviously academic training and clinical expertise, and weave that all through these steps, so that there's a methodical, stepwise way that people can kind of get through it. And I like how there's a signal that you have come up with the appropriate rule with when you get the squeal, when your reptilian brain starts going, we all the way home, and gets really, upset about the whole thing, and starts to fight. Because I oftentimes I think that's when we know we're on the correct path, when we start having resistance, from there. It's like the bumps in the road. But the great thing is, bumps in the road are just things for us to grab onto to pull ourselves forward. So go ahead.
I just want to make an important distinction with what you're saying, because without knowing when the reptilian brain is active, there's no way to control it.
Yeah.
So you want to have a very clear line that the reptilian brain can get you to cross. It's also really critical that you accept that cravings are a normal part of recovery. Some people think this means it's not working if you're craving. Mm-hmm. However, the rules you set, you want them to be reasonable and valid. So there's some rules you can't make. I can never make a rule that says I will never pee again because my bladder will tell me otherwise. Similarly, you couldn't make a rule that says I'm going to eat nothing until April 15th, right? Because your body's going to force you to do that otherwise. So picking the right, a craving or a squeal is part of the recovery process no matter what, and you should accept them. But also, having a craving or a squeal doesn't mean that you have the right rule. It just means that your reptilian brain is active.
Yeah.
Figuring out the right rules, you kind of have to evaluate it with a dietitian or a nutritionist, or at the very least go to Chronometer or MyFitnessPal and take a look to see if your you want to flood your body with nutrition at a slight caloric deficit if you want to lose weight.
Yeah.
If you're having trouble with overeating, people that try to lose it really quickly, they tend to rebound back the other way. Because this reptilian brain, this, this pig inside of us, it's a manifestation of the feast and famine response. It's a misfiring of the emergency system. So if you signal your brain that you live in an environment where food and calories are scarce, the odds of it suddenly firing and say, oh my God, we found calories, we found some nutrition, let's eat all of it right now. That goes up dramatically if you're kind of staying on that feast and famine roller coaster.
Yeah.
So you want to create rules that keep you on a fairly even keel and lose weight slowly if you struggle with binge eating, if you struggle with this kind of out of control overeating.
Yeah. And that makes sense to me because I sort of look at the body as we have all these sort of central governors, that are in there, where even if we're trying to become more fit, and once we push beyond a particular limit, our brain is gonna shut us down, and we're nowhere near like our capability at the point that it shuts us down. But if we push past it like 1% or 2%, and we do that enough times, that'll start to become like for lack of a better term, the new normal. And I think that's, what you're saying to people is, lose weight slowly. Don't put too much pressure on your inborn mechanisms and the way your nervous system is wired. Sort of like, it's like slowly introduce it. I sort of look at it as moving, like the new pastor comes to the church, and the piano's over here on the left. And if he moves it to the right side in one Sunday, we're going to have a big problem. But if he just moves it an inch a Sunday, eventually it'll get to the other side and nobody will have known the difference.
Interesting.
So yeah, I think that's kind of,
that's how you
my
introduce
interpretation.
this. Yeah. If most people with food, they live their lives like the nursery rhyme, which goes, when she was good, she was very, very good. When she was bad, she was horrid. And so like they're really bad for a while and then say, okay, I'm going to go on a diet. And then they come up with this they read a book and they come up with this crash diet or this really strict diet.
Mm-hmm.
And they try to lose 30 pounds in 30 days. And it just backfires them on them all the time. That's what I see.
Yeah. So what do you think the next, let's say someone is really struggling with overeating and they listen to the podcast and they're wanting to take sort of that next step in the right direction. What do you suggest for that person? This is a person who, let's say they're 50, 100 pounds overweight. They know it. They've tried all the, they've tried all the fad diets and all those kinds of things. What's the next step? Do you think it's, possibly your book? Is it possibly like getting professional help? Is it a little bit of both?
There are some good professionals out there. There's a disparity. It's interesting. What the evidence says is effective is cognitive behavioral therapy and possibly some SSRI medication for binge eating. That's what the clinical evidence says the experimental evidence says is effective. The professional treatment community does not necessarily embrace that. So what I do, I offer coaching. I don't do treatment anymore because I don't like the paradigm of treatment. It's like something someone is doing to you, and this is something where you have to take responsibility. So I do it as training and education and coaching.
Yeah.
But essentially, we're doing very similar things to what cognitive behavioral therapists are doing, and you could go find a cognitive behavioral therapist.
Okay.
What you will find with a majority of treatment professionals, they do something called food freedom treatment, or they tell you not to have any rules and to try to eat more mindfully. And I think that some people recover like that, and it can be helpful. The problem with mindful eating is, first of all, we don't live in a world where it's possible to be mindful all the time.
Mm-mm.
We've got so many stimuli impeding on us all the time. It's a good goal to strive for. But secondly, these companies are engineering things that break your hunger and full meters. Like I don't think it's possible to mindfully eat some of these bags and boxes and containers because they're designed to break your ability to eat mindfully. There are things that deactivate the sensors in your small intestines that tells you that, I think it's your small intestine, maybe it's your large intestine, small intestine, I think,
Yeah.
that tell you when you're full. When you have a bag of chips, they're engineered with multiple different assembly lines. So there's a slight variation in flavor, even though it's all one flavor you think, because your mind perceives variety to be an indication that there are other micronutrients available. So you keep eating. I mean, you can go on and on. There are just so many things that these people do. So it's very difficult to eat mindfully. So I'm not in favor of a mindfulness only approach. I really do think the rules-based approach works better.
Yeah.
We offer a free copy of the book on the website,
okay.
neverbingeagain.com. I'll tell you about that at the end. You click the big red button. So you certainly could read that and get a better sense of what we do. There is a set of food plan starter templates for whatever dietary philosophy whatever reasonable dietary philosophy you're working with. So we don't tell you what to eat, you tell yourself what to eat. But really you should start with one simple rule and see what your pig says, and then see why it's wrong. Go through the technique that I showed you. See what, as you start to do well with that, then go through the book. We offer coaching if you need a coach. I tried to set up the book and the podcast so that people can recover on their own if they want to, but people seem to recover faster and more effectively if we help them. So there are a lot of options available.
No, I like that. I like that, because I know that obviously we're all going to be wired a little bit different in terms of how we like to, receive help. And I'm always a big fan of coaching. I look at coaching as like time traveling. You know what I mean? It's just like you literally are here. You have blind spots. There's just things that you don't know. But if you did know them and you became aware of them, and somebody was able to help you implement, things into your life much more rapidly, your gains could come a whole heck of a lot faster, as well. So speaking of that, so let's talk a little bit about the book. How can people not only get a copy of the book, get in touch with you? Where are the best places for them to go and
it's all at the website. It's all at the website. If you go to neverbingeagain.com,
perfect,
click the big red button, you'll get three things. You'll get a free copy of the book in Kindle, Nook, or PDF format. So the electronic copies of the book are free. You can also get the Audible or the paperback for a charge. You will get a set of recorded coaching sessions so that you know what this process is really like. I know a lot of you are watching and saying, Jason, why do you have this weird ass psychologist on your show who's got a pig inside of him? That sounds awful. And it sounds like maybe it would be harsh or cruel, but it's really not. It's a very compassionate process that restores people's hope and enthusiasm and optimism about food within one session. And I want you to hear that. So I recorded a whole bunch of sessions. And you will get a free set of food plan starter templates. So that's a set of hypothetical rules that you can adjust for your own need. Because see, Jason, we don't want to dictate what you eat, both because we don't have the expertise, we're not medical doctors or dietitians, but also because there's this phenomenon with overeating where the pig says, oh, that diet doctor's food plan just isn't working for you. You better go try another one. And in the meantime, let's go binge some more. So we find that the way to stop that is to come up with your own plan, to really take responsibility and come up with your own plan. So we call them starter templates. So you get those three things and you'll be led to everything else from there. We have a podcast, we have a readers forum. We have 6 other books, specialty books on nighttime eating and dealing with specific triggers. And, and then we have the coaching program. We have a coach training program. So neverbingeagain.com, click the big red button.
Love it. Love it. Now, is the podcast also Never Binge Again?
Yeah.
Great. Love it. Love it. Yeah. I love, Glenn, I love this approach. I love the honesty about it. I think that is a huge piece, and just, confronting things as they are, and really looking at, okay, this is how we're wired. But at the same time, there's these folks, over here that also know that, and they sort of engineer it against us. And they play on our sort of natural bent, to stir up, the things inside of us that would make us overeat,
Yeah.
and play or prey, depending on how you want to look at it, on us, so that we spend more, buy more, their pockets get bigger, type of a thing. And I'm glad that came up, because I think that's something that most people don't understand, is that the food manufacturers have a tremendous amount of leeway in not only how they market to us, but what they can put in the products, what they can call them, how they can package it, how they can do all these other kinds of things, which is probably a really great second podcast, by the way, sometime in the future, because you would
Sure, if you
know
want
way
to.
more about it than anybody.
I don't know that. I don't know
Well, I
that
mean,
far, but yeah.
anybody I've ever interviewed, for sure, or at
Okay.
least in my circle. But I just want to say thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for doing what you're doing, and unraveling this mystery, in the way that you've done it, to impact the lives of the people who take your material seriously, implement it into their lives, and transform and change not only their own lives, but those around them as well. So
Thanks.
I appreciate you coming on, and I really enjoyed the conversation today.
I appreciate you having me. Thank you, Jason.
My pleasure.